à cet égard, il n'y a que l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Il n'y a que quelques pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest qui sont pionniers en cette matière. C'est lesquels? C'est la Côte d'Ivoire, c'est le Burkina Faso, c'est le Mali et le Niger qui ont déjà mis en place ce que les anglophones appellent un legal framework, un cadre légal qui protège les défenseurs des droits de l'homme. Dans les autres pays qui restent, qui sont hors zone de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, la situation est catastrophique. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous initions quelques plaidoyers à gauche et à droite avec les moyens qui sont les nôtres au nord, dans les pays du sud, dans les pays de l'Est et de l'Afrique centrale, pour que ces pays puissent emboîter également le pas et puissent se mettre en ordre de bataille par rapport à cette situation de protection des droits de l'homme. Nous avons pu remarquer depuis l'avènement du Covid-19, il y a 2-3 ans, les États ont profité de cette circonstance particulière de pandémie du Covid-19 pour mettre à mal l'espace civique. C'est la raison pour laquelle partout vous entendez les petites voix des défenseurs des droits de l'homme qui se lèvent à gauche et à droite pour parler des restrictions de l'espace civique. Concrètement, c'est quoi ce que l'État interdisait à l'époque sous Covid-19 aux gens de devoir exercer librement les réunions et de manifester sur la voie publique, alors que ça ne pouvait être qu'une mesure temporaire limitant la contamination de ce virus. On cherche depuis lors à transformer ces mesures hygiéniques en normes de conduite, en violation flagrante d'ailleurs des lignes directrices de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples sur la liberté d'association et de réunion. Mon appel auprès de ces États, de ces 54 États, c'est que nous avons une charte africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples qui protège la liberté d'association et de réunion. Nous avons le pacte international relatif aux droits civils et politiques qui dit exactement la même chose, et même la déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme et des peuples qui demande à ce que les gens puissent se réunir et manifester de manière tout à fait libre. Mon appel, donc, c'est de voir que ces États puissent respecter ces principes auxquels ils ont librement adhéré. Je reste à votre disposition. Suivez régulièrement la chaîne YouTube de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples. Vous aurez comme ça une mise à jour assez régulière des petites capsules qui seront formulées par les commissaires, qui seront animées par les commissaires, qui vous permettront d'avoir une situation, une vue holistique des droits de l'homme sur notre continent, en termes, n'est-ce pas, de mécanismes spéciaux et en termes global, holistiques de la Charte africaine de l'homme et des peuples elle-même. Je vous remercie.
मुझे ऐसा लगा कि भगवान ने मुझे चुरा दिया। पता लगा कि मेरे अंदर हेपेटाइटिस सी बीमारी है, तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि भगवान ने मुझे चुरा दिया। पता लगा कि मेरे अंदर हेपेटाइटिस सी बीमारी है, तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि भगवान ने मुझे चुरा दिया।
Chers délégués, chers collègues, chers invités, je suis Atem Essayem, président du comité pour la prévention de la torture depuis l'année 2017. C'est avec une grande émotion que nous commémorons aujourd'hui le 20e anniversaire du comité pour la prévention de la torture en Afrique et le 40e anniversaire de la Convention des Nations Unies contre la torture et les autres peines ou traitements cruels, inhumains ou dégradants, l'UNCAT. En tant que président du comité pour la prévention de la torture en Afrique, c'est avec humilité que je saisis l'occasion de m'adresser à vous et de réaffirmer notre engagement inébranlable en faveur de la prévention de la torture et des mauvais traitements sur notre continent. Aujourd'hui, je suis fier de souligner l'importance de l'observation générale numéro 4 sur le droit à réparation des victimes de la torture et autres peines ou traitements cruels, inhumains ou dégradants, adopté en 2017. Ce document historique fournit des orientations cruciales pour garantir la justice et les réparations aux victimes en reconnaissant leur dignité et leur droit à réparation. En outre, je tiens à souligner l'importance des règles d'Abidjan sur l'établissement et le fonctionnement des mécanismes d'alerte et de rapport à la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples sur la situation de torture et autres peines ou traitements cruels, inhumains ou dégradants. Ces règles constituent un outil essentiel dans nos efforts collectifs pour renforcer les mécanismes de responsabilisation et prévenir la torture dans toute l'Afrique. Alors que nous commémorons ces anniversaires, nous devons également redoubler d'efforts pour renforcer l'état de droit et promouvoir les droits de l'homme sur notre continent. Grâce au plaidoyer, au renforcement des capacités et à la collaboration avec les gouvernements et la société civile, nous pouvons œuvrer à l'éradication de la torture sous toutes ses formes. Permettez-moi de partager avec vous une réflexion personnelle. Cette route que nous avons parcourue n'a pas été facile. C'est un honneur pour moi de continuer l'œuvre entamée par mes prédécesseurs qui avaient en charge ce comité. Les défis sont grands, sont multiples et sont difficiles et n'ont jamais été faciles à relever. Je voudrais prendre un moment pour rappeler et saluer la mémoire de feu Jean-Baptiste Nirongero, un collègue vénéré qui a joué un rôle essentiel dans la rédaction des lignes directrices de Robben Island. Son héritage continuera à nous inspirer dans notre quête de justice et de dignité pour tous. Je tiens à exprimer ma profonde gratitude à tous ceux qui ont contribué au succès du Comité pour la prévention de la torture en Afrique au cours des 2 dernières décennies. Votre dévouement, votre passion et votre engagement nous inspirent à œuvrer pour un monde meilleur et plus juste. Je vous remercie.
Saudações aos estimados delegados, colegas e amigos. O meu nome é Maria Teresa Manuela. Sou relatora especial para as prisões, condições de detenção e policiamento em África e também membro do Comitê para a Prevenção da Tortura em África. Ao reunirmos-nos hoje aqui para celebrar momentos importantes na jornada rumo aos direitos humanos e à dignidade, é com profunda honra que me dirijo a vós como membro do Comitê para a Prevenção da Tortura em África. Ao longo das últimas 2 décadas, o CPTA tem estado na vanguarda da proteção dos direitos dos detidos em todo o mundo e no continente africano. Através do seu empenhamento inabalável na prevenção da tortura e na garantia de condições de detenção humanas, o CPTA tem desempenhado um papel essencial na promoção de uma cultura de respeito pelos direitos humanos nos sistemas prisionais. Do mesmo modo, a Convenção contra a Tortura é um farol de esperança e justiça, servindo de norma universal contra a tortura e outras formas de maus tratos. Durante 4 décadas, proporcionou um quadro para os Estados cumprirem as suas obrigações e responsabilizarem os autores de atos de tortura. No entanto, apesar dos progressos registrados, temos de reconhecer que ainda há muito a fazer. Demasiadas pessoas em África continuam a sofrer tratamento desumano nos centros de detenção, desde a sobrelotação aos cuidados de saúde inadequados, da violência à falta de acesso à representação legal. Os desafios são muito e complexos. Como relatora especial para as prisões e condições de detenção e policiamento em África, estou empenhada em trabalhar incansavelmente com os governos, as organizações da sociedade civil e os parceiros internacionais para resolver estas questões prementes. Temos de trabalhar no sentido da plena aplicação das diretrizes de Robben Island e de outros instrumentos relevantes, garantindo que todas as pessoas privadas de liberdade sejam tratadas com dignidade e respeito. Além disso, temos de redobrar os nossos esforços para erradicar a tortura em todas as suas formas e responsabilizar os seus atores. Isto exige não só uma reforma legislativa, mas também uma mudança nas atitudes sociais no sentido de uma tolerância zero em relação à tortura e aos maus tratos. Em conclusão, reafirmemos o nosso empenhamento na nobre causa da promoção e proteção dos direitos de todos os indivíduos, incluindo os que se encontram em situação de detenção. Juntos podemos construir um futuro em que todas as pessoas sejam tratadas com dignidade e sem exceção. Muito obrigada.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Idrissa Sow. Je suis président du groupe de travail sur la peine de mort, les exécutions extrajudiciaires, sommaires ou arbitraires et les disparitions forcées en Afrique. Je suis également vice-président du comité pour la prévention de la torture en Afrique. C'est pour moi un profond honneur de m'adresser à vous en cette occasion mémorable. Aujourd'hui, alors que nous célébrons le 20e anniversaire du comité pour la prévention de la torture en Afrique et le 40e anniversaire de la Convention des Nations Unies contre la torture et autres peines ou traitements cruels, inhumains ou dégradants, c'est pour nous une grande opportunité de jeter un regard sur les étapes franchies et d'exprimer par la même occasion notre engagement renouvelé à relever les défis dans la noble cause de l'éradication de la torture sous toutes ses formes. Des progrès significatifs ont été réalisés dans nos efforts pour lutter contre la torture et défendre les droits de l'homme. Nous avons noté la mise en place de mécanismes nationaux de prévention dans plusieurs États africains, assurant une surveillance cruciale des lieux de détention et renforçant ainsi les mécanismes de responsabilisation. De plus, notre attention est portée sur le développement de la législation et des modèles visant à criminaliser la torture et à jeter les bases de réformes législatives promouvant l'interdiction et la prévention de la torture. Cependant, notre travail est loin d'être terminé. Nous devons continuer à plaider en faveur de la ratification de la Convention des Nations Unies contre la torture, ainsi que du protocole facultatif se rapportant à cette convention et aux autres peines ou traitements cruels, inhumains ou dégradants par tous les États africains. Ces instruments sont des outils essentiels de notre point de vue dans l'arsenal destiné à combattre la torture et à garantir la protection des droits des détenus. De plus, la mise en œuvre des instruments de soft law relatifs à la torture, tels que les lignes directrices de Robben Island, reste pour nous une grande priorité. Nous sommes convaincus qu'en travaillant en étroite collaboration avec les États et les organisations de la société civile, nous pouvons promouvoir l'incorporation de ces lignes directrices dans la législation nationale et les pratiques en renforçant ainsi les protections qui sont dues aux détenus et en prévenant la torture. En regardant vers l'avenir, notre comité est résolument engagé à jouer un rôle de leader dans la lutte contre la torture. Cela implique des engagements plus étroits avec les États et les organisations de la société civile pour garantir que les voix des victimes soient entendues et que leurs droits soient respectés. En favorisant le dialogue et la coopération, nous pouvons développer des stratégies innovantes pour relever les défis émergents et promouvoir la responsabilité des auteurs de torture. Je vous remercie pour votre aimable attention.
Congratulations and happy birthday to the Committee for the Prevention of Torture in Africa, the CPTA, on the occasion of its 20th anniversary. My name is Barbara Bernat. I'm the Secretary General of the Association for the Prevention of Torture, APT, an international non-governmental human rights organization based in Geneva, Switzerland, working worldwide to prevent torture. And we were closely associated to the CPTA from the beginning. Let me mention here 3 highlights. First, cooperation. It started back when the APT proposed to the African Commission at its 28th ordinary session to organize a joint workshop for the effective implementation of Article 5 of the African Charter on Human Rights, prohibiting all forms of torture and ill treatment. This workshop took place in February 2002 in Robben Island, and it drafted concrete guidelines on the prohibition and prevention of torture in Africa, the so-called Robben Island Guidelines. The guidelines were adopted by a resolution by the African Commission in 2002. This resolution also establishes a follow-up committee to support their implementation, composed of commissioners, the APT, and experts. It met for the first time in 2004 and was later renamed the CPTA. But behind institutions, there are persons. And my second highlight is paying tribute to one person who played a key role in this journey, my former colleague and friend, Jean-Baptiste Nizurugero, who so sadly passed away last November. He was one of the drafters of the Robben Island Guidelines, and he was also in the first meeting of the CPTA and was a member until 2019 when he retired. And we are also celebrating his legacy here today. The third highlight is the key role of the CPTA in implementing the vision of torture prevention in Africa enshrined in the Robben Island Guidelines. For example, on the first hours of detention, it mentions the importance of basic safeguards such as access to lawyers, and these safeguards are now integrated in the principles on effective interviewing for investigations and information gathering known as the Mendes Principles. The CPTA has been a leading actor on the promotion of the Mendes Principles in Africa. Thanks to the CPTA, there is a standalone resolution adopted by the African Commission in 2022 welcoming the Mendes Principles and calling on states to implement them. And the CPTA is also now leading on the implementation of the Mendes Principles and is organizing the first sub-regional workshop to discuss the Mendes Principles with police officers of Southern Africa in June this year. Prevention of torture and ill treatment is an ongoing task, but also a shared responsibility. Together, we can prevent torture.
I'm Solomon Ayele Derso. I'm a member of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. I chair the working group on extractive industries, environment and human rights violations in Africa in the Commission. This is one of the mechanisms of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which is tasked with the responsibility of monitoring the human rights situation and environmental issues that arise in the extractive industries sector. As you all know, the extractive industry sectors historically, but also broadly speaking in Africa, has very substantial consequences on the lives, livelihoods, land, territories, as well as the environment of the African continent. While the extractive industry sector has enormous potential for contribution to the socio-economic development and thereby the improvement of the living standard of people of the continent, more often than not, this potential of the extractive industry sector has not been felt in the lived experiences of most people on the continent. Contrary to this, the natural resources of the continent and the operation of the extractive industries has brought a great deal of suffering, a great deal of human rights violations, and also environmental degradations on many parts of the continent. In the context of the current rush for critical minerals and also what are called transition minerals, in the context of the green energy transition, there is another scramble for these rare minerals on the African continent. And in this context, our working group asked the question whether once again, as in the past, the continent is going to face the resource curse arising from this rush for critical minerals. So our work as the working group is to promote the respect for and observance of the human rights standards of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, particularly as they relate to the exploitation and extraction of natural resources that the continent is enormously endowed with. Under Article 21 of the African Charter, specific obligations have been laid down. Actually, so much so that this is one of, if not the longest provisions of the Charter, highlighting the importance that is attached to and the historical significance of the natural resource exploitation of the African continent for the exclusive benefit of the people of the continent. With respect to the state of human rights on the African continent and broadly what we can do and should do, I think it's important to note that in terms of normative development, having the right norms relating to human rights, in terms of institution building, having the various institutions for the monitoring and implementation of human rights standards. A lot of progress have been made, both through the normative development contribution of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and broadly by the African Union. Yet the gap between the promise of these various and progressive human rights norms and the lived realities of our people is ever increasingly expanding. We have to feel the urgency and we have to feel the gravity of what the vast majority of people on our continent is feeling. The higher the gulf between the promise of human rights and the lived realities of our people, the higher the challenge for appreciating the relevance of our work and the role of the Commission. We therefore need to work hard in order to harness the role and contribution of all sectors of society in order to narrow down this enormous gulf between the promise of our norms and the lived realities of the people on the continent. That is why it's extremely important for the Commission to work with other sectors of society beyond and above human rights institutions, human rights NGOs and civil society organizations. The role of the media needs to be harnessed and to be harnessed enormously. The role of policymakers, particularly in the economic sphere, needs to be harnessed. The role of policymakers in other areas, the digital space, also needs to be appreciated and harnessed and taken advantage of. We have to use civil society organizations, use women and the enormous potentials and entrepreneurial skills of our people. I thank you very much. I'm Solomon Ayele Derso. I'm a member of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. I chair the working group on extractive industries, environment and human rights violations in Africa in the Commission. This is one of the mechanisms of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which is tasked with the responsibility of monitoring the human rights situation and environmental issues that arise in the extractive industries sector. As you all know, the extractive industry sectors historically, but also broadly speaking in Africa, has very substantial consequences on the lives, livelihoods, land, territories, as well as the environment of the African continent. While the extractive industry sector has enormous potential for contribution to the socio-economic development and thereby the improvement of the living standard of people of the continent, more often than not, this potential of the extractive industry sector has not been felt in the lived experiences of most people on the continent. Contrary to this, the natural resources of the continent and the operation of the extractive industries has brought a great deal of suffering, a great deal of human rights violations, and also environmental degradations on many parts of the continent. In the context of the current rush for critical minerals and also what are called transition minerals, in the context of the green energy transition, there is another scramble for these rare minerals on the African continent. And in this context, our working group asked the question whether once again, as in the past, the continent is going to face the resource curse arising from this rush for critical minerals. So our work as the working group is to promote the respect for and observance of the human rights standards of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, particularly as they relate to the exploitation and extraction of natural resources that the continent is enormously endowed with. Under Article 21 of the African Charter, specific obligations have been laid out. Actually, so much so that this is one of, if not the longest provisions of the Charter, highlighting the importance that is attached to and the historical significance of the natural resource exploitation of the African continent for the exclusive benefit of the people of the continent. With respect to the state of human rights on the African continent and broadly what we can do and should do, I think it's important to note that in terms of normative development, having the right norms relating to human rights, in terms of institution building, having the various institutions for the monitoring and implementation of human rights standards, a lot of progress have been made, both through the normative development contribution of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and broadly by the African Union. Yet the gap between the promise of these various and progressive human rights norms and the lived realities of our people is ever increasingly expanding. We have to feel the urgency and we have to feel the gravity of what the vast majority of people on our continent is feeling. The higher the gulf between the promise of human rights and the lived realities of our people, the higher the challenge for appreciating the relevance of our work and the role of the Commission. We therefore need to work hard in order to harness the role and contribution of all sectors of society in order to narrow down this enormous gulf between the promise of our norms and the lived realities of the people on the continent. That is why it's extremely important for the Commission to work with other sectors of society beyond and above human rights institutions, human rights NGOs and civil society organizations. The role of the media needs to be harnessed and to be harnessed enormously. The role of policymakers, particularly in the economic sphere, needs to be harnessed. The role of policymakers in other areas, the digital space, also needs to be appreciated and harnessed and taken advantage of. We have to use civil society organizations, use women and the enormous potentials and entrepreneurial skills of our people. I thank you very much.
तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि भगवान ने मुझे दूसरा दिया। तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि भगवान ने मुझे दूसरा दिया। पता लगा कि मेरे अंदर एंजाइटी सी बीमारी है। तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि भगवान ने मुझे दूसरा दिया। तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि भगवान ने मुझे दूसरा दिया। पता लगा कि मेरे अंदर एंजाइटी सी बीमारी है। तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि भगवान ने मुझे दूसरा दिया।
One of the cases that stuck in my memory was the case of an old man who was injured by the police during one of the protests in 2016. He was injured by the water cannon jets thrown by the police into his head, and no one dealt with his case. The poor old man was among the other victims of the excessive use of force by police.
It is someone who suffered in the hands of state officials or in the hands of someone who acted with the silent consent of state officials, with the knowledge of the state. So victims of torture can be quite a broad range of people can become a victim of torture. It can be regular people like you and me.
As the world is facing multiple crises and armed conflicts, widespread impunity of torture across all regions, and the continuing closing civic space, we are reminded of the importance of working united to protect those most vulnerable to torture, including women, children, migrants, detainees, human rights defenders, and to always keep the victim survivor in the center of its work towards achieving our shared goals.
I raised his case in the dialogue with the government as an emblematic case of the abuses committed by the police that have not been investigated. Over a month after the committee adopted concluding observation on this particular state, I was informed that investigations into the case of this old man and other victims had been launched, and that media reported that the police chief had publicly apologized to him and his family and said that the victims will receive compensation. After this case, I realized that the impact of the committee's work can be both global but also individual. Each time our work reaches the grassroots, and that means justice for victims.
The Committee Against Torture is really accessible and operates in an efficient manner and really can bring justice and redress also on national level. So when they are desperate, when nobody hears them out in their own countries, there is still an authority, there is a global authority that can ensure that the justice is done and that their voice is heard.
The committee's regular reviews of state parties are an important entry point to mobilize for change and to establish a basis for dialogue between state, civil society organizations and the authorities to impact
Mesdames et messieurs, Excellences, honorables messieurs les commissaires, Madame la vice-présidente, Madame la secrétaire et chers collègues juristes du secrétariat, nous avons repris avec nos travaux. Avant qu'on ne commence le panel sur le thème de l'Union africaine pour l'année 2024, le droit à l'éducation, un panel très important parce que c'est le thème de l'année. Le droit à l'éducation est un droit important. Permettez que nous donnions la parole sur leur demande au gouvernement de Mauritanie parce qu'ils ne pouvaient pas intervenir le matin. Lorsque nous faisions Human Rights Situation in Africa, le gouvernement de Mauritanie a demandé qu'on le fasse après le coffee break. Mais vu qu'on a débordé la petite session privée qu'on a eue, on n'a pas pu reprendre à 11 heures. Je demande à la technique, est-ce que le gouvernement de Mauritanie est en ligne? Si le gouvernement de la délégation de Mauritanie est en ligne, nous allons leur donner la parole pour 7 minutes. Comme ça, ils font le discours sur l'état des droits de l'homme en Mauritanie. Excellence, vous avez la parole pour 7 minutes. Vous êtes en ligne? Oui, on attend qu'il se connecte dans quelques instants. La délégation de Mauritanie, si elle est là, si elle m'entend, qu'elle veuille bien allumer la caméra et prendre la parole. Oui, vous avez la parole pour 7 minutes.
Merci, monsieur. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. والسلام على سيد الرئيس الإفريقية لحقوق الإنسان، السادة والسيدات أعضاء اللجنة الخبراء، حضرات السادة والسيدات ذوي الدول، السادة والسيدات ممثلو المنظمات الدولية والإقليمية، السادة والسيدات ممثلو المؤسسات الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان ومنظمات المجتمع المدني، أيها الجمع الكريم، إنه لشرف لي عظيم أن أشارككم اليوم أعمال الدورة 79 للجنة الإفريقية لحقوق الإنسان والشعوب. سيد الرئيس، أيها الجمع الكريم، لا يمكنني استعراض حالة حقوق الإنسان في بلدي قبل استحضار ما يعيشه الشعب الفلسطيني في قطاع غزة من معاناة إنسانية أليمة جراء الحرب المستمرة وانتشار مشاهد الخراب والدمار الهائل وما خلفته من قتلى وجرحى ومشردين من النساء والأطفال والمسنين والأبرياء والعسر، وهي مشاهد يندي لها الجبين بما تعتبر عرض صريح وانتهاك بين لحقوق وكرامة الإنسانية، بما يضع قداسة التمتع بحقوق الإنسان وكرامته والقيم الإنسانية والقانونية إجمالا أمام المحن. فمن واجبنا جميعا إذن العمل من أجل الوقف الفوري للحرب والشروع في المفاوضات تقود قيام دولة فلسطينية ذات سيادة طبقا للقرارات الشرعية الدولية. أيها السادة والسيدات، لقد سعت بلادي إلى إحداث تطور نوعي فيما يخص ترقية وحماية حقوق الإنسان، كان محل إشادة وتقدير كبيرين من طرف الشركاء والفاعلين محليا وإقليميا ودوليا، وذلك عبر اتخاذ جملة من التدابير الفعالة مكنت من تعزيز الإطارين القانوني والمؤسسي وخلق وعي وطني لتسريع بالولوج للحقوق واستنباط الواجبات المترتبة عليها من جهة، كما مكن من الوفاء بالتزاماتنا اتجاه الآليات الإقليمية والدولية ذات الصلة من جهة أخرى. سيد الرئيس، أيها الجمع الكريم، تعزز الإطار القانوني الناظم للعمل الحقوقي في بلادي باعتماد ترسانة قانونية تتواءم مع الاتفاقيات الدولية والإقليمية لحقوق الإنسان، واتخاذ كافة الإجراءات اللازمة بتطبيق الفعلي والصارم للقوانين الوطنية المعمول بها، إضافة إلى اعتماد حكومة بلادي شهر أكتوبر الماضي للاستراتيجية الوطنية لترقية وحماية حقوق الإنسان، والتي سيمكن تنفيذها من تجسيد رؤية موريتانية شاملة لمختلف قضايا وإشكالات حقوق الإنسان في البلد، تحقيقا للعدالة والاجتماعيين وتعزيز دولة القانون وإقامة مجتمع شامل خال من كل أشكال الإفصال. وفيما يخص الإطار المؤسسي، أنشأت حكومة بلادي لجنة وزارية برئاسة معالي الوزير الأول تعنى بتذليل الصعاب والدفع بالجهود المبذولة في المجال الحقوقي، كما أنشأت خلية متابعة مشتركة يعهد إليها بتتبع الملفات المتعلقة بالعبودية والإتجار بالأشخاص المطروحة أمام القضاء، ووضع قاعدة بيانات دقيقة بهذا الخصوص، فضلا عن تفعيل الهيئة الوطنية لمحاربة الإتجار بالأشخاص وتهريب المهاجرين التي تعمل من خلال آلياتها المتعددة على ضمان حماية حقوق مختلف الضحايا الإتجار بالأشخاص ومساعدتهم عبر الصندوق المخصص لذات القرار، فضلا عن تبسيط آلية استقبال ومعالجة الشكاوي المتعلقة بالإتجار وحقوق الإنسان عموما. سيد الرئيس، في مجال الحكامة الرشيدة، تعيش بلادي هذه الأيام أجواء الانتخابات الرئاسية التي سيجرى شوطها الأول نهاية شهر يونيو المقبل بمشاركة مختلف التشكيلات الطيف السياسي الموريتاني من أغلبية ومعارضة، وبإشراف المباشر من اللجنة الوطنية المستقلة للانتخابات. سيد الرئيس، تحرص بلادي دوما على الوفاء بالتزاماتها تجاه الآليات الإقليمية والدولية لحقوق الإنسان، تتابع باعتزاز تفاعلها الإيجابي مع هذه الآليات. وفي هذا السياق استضافت بلادي خلال العام الماضي فريق العام الأممي للمعني بحقوق المرأة والفتاة، كما شاركت بلادي في الحوار التفاعلي مع المقرر الخاص للأمم المتحدة المعني بأشكال الرد المعاصرة لنقاش التقرير الختامي لزيارته التي قام بها لبلادي في عام 2022، إضافة إلى تقديم التقارير الأولية والدولية أمام هيئات المعاهدات التالية: لجنة معاهدة جميع أشكال التمييز ضد المرأة، لجنة حقوق الأشخاص بالإعاقة، لجنة حماية جميع الأشخاص من الاختفاء القسري، لجنة الحقوق الاقتصادية والاجتماعية والثقافية. وعلى صعيد الإقليمي تواصل بلادي التزاماتها بمواكبة المسار الإفريقي لحقوق الإنسان عبر التقيد بالتزاماتها أمام اللجنة الإفريقية لحقوق الإنسان والشعوب الموقرة، وتقديمها التقارير الأولية والدورية في الآجال المحددة، ونفس الالتزام أمام اللجنة العربية لحقوق الإنسان. ختاما، اسمحوا لي سيد الرئيس أن أثمن عاليا باسم حكومة الجمهورية الإسلامية الموريتانية جهود اللجنة الإفريقية لحقوق الإنسان والشعوب على مواكبتها لبلادنا في مجال حقوق الإنسان، وأن أعرب لكم عن عزم السلطات العليا في بلادي على المضي قدما في مواكبة كافة الجهود الرامية إلى حفظ وصون كرامة الإنسان وفقا للمعايير الدولية والإمكانات والموارد المتاحة، مسميا لأعمال دورتنا التوفيق والنجاح. أشكركم والسلام عليكم.
Merci beaucoup à la délégation mauritanienne pour ce discours important. Je vais demander à la vice-présidente de réagir par rapport à ça. C'est à ma demande d'ailleurs, par rapport à toutes ces belles propositions. Madame la vice-présidente.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Your rendition of the human rights situation in Mauritania and all the good work that is happening at the member state in terms of putting in place the necessary structures and wherewithal to ensure the promotion and protection of human rights at the national context. We note that you will hold elections later in the year. We wish you good luck for that, and we look forward to free, fair, and transparent elections and in an atmosphere of calm. We also note that you had previously presented your report under the Charter protocol. We look forward to the implementation of those recommendations. In that respect, Mauritania had already authorized a promotion mission for the Commission, and we look forward to collaboration that we'll have new dates so that we will be on the ground to see for ourselves firsthand what is happening, and especially in terms of the implementations of the concluding observations at the national level. We also thank you for your interest in the Commission. We also note that Mauritania has invited the Commission to host one of its sessions there. We want to thank you, and we look forward to being on the ground in Mauritania to carry out that session and to collaborate more with the member state in that respect. I thank you for your kind attention, and we look forward to that. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la vice-présidente, et nous espérons que nous allons revoir la délégation mauritanienne dans les jours à venir, au mois de juillet, comme vous venez de le dire. Maintenant, nous allons passer au panel sur le thème de l'Union africaine pour l'année 2024, consacré au droit à l'éducation. Pour ce panel, l'honorable commissaire Moadford Zakaria Mwandenga va nous diriger dans ça pour que nous puissions terminer dans maximum 1h30. Commissioner Mwandenga, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, commissioners, secretariat, and interpreters, it is an honor for me to lead this panel, which is on the right to education. And the order of the program will be as follows. I shall deliver an introductory statement, and thereafter we are going to have an overview of the current state of education across the continent and the strategic objectives of the AU in reforming education systems by Dr. Kasley Alabode Stevens, who is a policy officer at the African Union's Commission's Department of Education. Then we are going to have the Vice Chair, who is going to speak on the issue to do with the education for the girl child, opportunities and challenges, which will be followed by a presentation by the Honorable Commissioner Idrissa Sow, a member of the working group on older persons and persons with disabilities, who is going to make a presentation on the rights to education and provision for suitable educational systems for persons with disabilities. Then it will be followed by the presentation by Commissioner Ogana, who is the chairperson of the working group on indigenous population and communities in Africa, who is going to talk about access to education of indigenous populations, stroke communities in Africa. And lastly, but not the least, we are going to have a presentation on access to education for refugees and asylum seekers by Commissioner Sauma, who is the Special Rapporteur on the rights of refugees, migrants, and internally displaced persons in Africa. We shall follow it up with an interactive discussion, and thereafter I'm going to deliver my closing remarks. Distinguished delegates, may I proceed with my introductory statement. Education is like a road leading to the future we all want. However, like many roads in Africa, it is filled with potholes, bumps, and several obstacles. While addressing the World Bank Conference in 1997, former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, said, "Knowledge is power. Information is liberating. Education is a premise of progress in every society, in every family." The year 2024 is essential on the road to achieving Agenda 2063. Without education, we cannot attain the Africa we want. Recent reviews of the African Continental Education Strategy for Africa and Education 2030 Framework for Action, the AU UNESCO Continental Reports on the CESA and SDG 42, and the joint AU UNICEF reports on transforming education in Africa point to the fact that over the past 10 years, African governments have undertaken a wide range of programs and policy level efforts to ensure that no child is left behind in access to education. There have been sustained efforts on the continent to ensure access, completion, and quality of basic education for all. Overall, the proportion of out-of-school children has decreased until around 2010. I believe it is essential we take note of our achievements, bearing in mind that there is still a lot to be done. However, despite efforts and progress made, three main indicators ring a warning bell. Although the out-of-school rates, i.e. the proportion of children and young people in the official age range for the given level of education who are not enrolled in primary, pre-primary, secondary, and higher levels of education keeps on decreasing, especially for the primary level. The absolute number has reached the alarming global estimate of 98 million in Africa. The learning poverty rate, i.e., the share of children who cannot read a simple text with comprehension by age 10 was the highest in sub-Saharan Africa before COVID-19 at 86%. This rate is likely to have worsened after the pandemic, estimated now at 90%. This means that 9 out of 10 children cannot read a simple text with comprehension by age 10. Africa would need 17 million additional teachers in order to achieve universal primary and secondary education by 2030. Looking closely at each specific goal in CSE S 16 to 25 or in the SDG 4, one realizes the urgency to transform and revitalize the education system on the continent, while paying special attention to marginalized groups, including girls, children in rural areas, those living with disabilities, and those in the move, including those in fragile countries and contexts. Education is a basic right which serves as a tool to raise men and women out of poverty, level inequalities, and ensure sustainable development. It is universal in nature and must be available without discrimination. Various international and regional human rights frameworks expressly provide for the right to education. The African Charter on Human and People's Rights recognizes the diverse nature of these rights as seen in its provisions, whilst Article 17 of the African Charter stipulates the basic rights to education. Article 25 stipulates the duty of the states to promote human rights education through education, training, and publication. It is also the duty of the states to ensure the respect and understanding of rights and freedoms contained in the African Charter. Notwithstanding other African regional human rights frameworks, such as the African Charter on the Rights of the Child and Welfare of the Child, the Protocol to the African Charter on the Rights of Women in Africa, and the African Youth Charter also provide for the right to education. The African Commission, concerned with disparities in education levels and the inadequate resources available by states in their budgets to realize the right to education, including the provision of access and opportunity to all adopted resolutions, reiterated the need for human rights education at all levels and age states to guarantee the full scope of the rights to education, respectively. In a bid to achieve the goals of the theme of the year 2024 and raise awareness of the rights to education across Africa, the Commission's Working Group on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights in Africa has convened this panel with commissioners and an expert from various working groups to highlight the progress made so far, as well as the challenges that persist in the education of children, especially the girl child, migrants, refugees, internally displaced persons, persons with disabilities, indigenous persons. It is our hope that the resilient education systems, which we hope for, will be built for increased access to inclusive, lifelong, quality, and relevant learning in Africa. And the respect for and understanding of the rights to education will be realized among states as stipulated in the African Charter and other regional human rights instruments. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for listening to me and will now give the floor to our next speaker, who is the Vice Chairperson. Dr. Kasley Olabode Stevens, who is joining us online. Doctor, are you there?
Yeah, sure, I'm here. Thank you very much. I'm here. Can you hear me, sir?
You may proceed.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Kasley Olabode Stevens. I bring greetings from the Department of Education, Science, Technology, and Innovation, and all existing protocol observed. I will be presenting on the theme of the year 2024, education, building resilient education systems for increased access to inclusive, lifelong, quality, and relevant learning in Africa. And I will start by saying this is it's an important topic for us as a continent, as also there is need for us to delve critically into the role of education in shaping the future of Africa. And you will agree with me that we've had some leaders who have recognized education as a transformative tool that empowers individuals to create positive change and shape the destiny of society. And then one of the important role of this is promotion of economic growth. Education, we know that it fosters social development. It enhances health and well-being of learners, and it also eradicates poverty by empowering the marginalized, bridging the gap between social economic disparity and providing equal opportunity for all. And that is why what we are campaigning for. And when you look at the key elements of educational development in Africa, we have what we call the governance and accountability. We have the ICT and infrastructure. We have partnership, data evidence, policies, standards, and financing. And there is a circle. Inside the circle, we have the curriculum, we have quality and certification, learning environment, teaching and pedagogy. And then when you look at the continental education strategy for Africa, it was endorsed in 2015. And before this, we were despite the effort of our member states to transform education system in Africa, we still face some challenges: equity crisis, the learning crisis, relevance, and affordability. And when you look at the agenda, AU Agenda 2063, we can see there it's an integrated, prosperous, peaceful Africa, driven by its citizens, representing economic force in the global arena. And this calls for an education and skill revolution underpinned by science, technology, and innovation. And in this case, we have the continental education strategy, which is to reorient Africa education and training to meet the knowledge, skills, innovation, and creativity required to nurture core values and promote sustainable development at all levels to achieve the Africa that we want. And under the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, we have 12 strategic objectives. The first strategic objective is to revitalize the teaching to ensure quality and relevance. We have to build, rehabilitate a self-education infrastructure, develop policies that ensure a permanent, healthy, and conducive learning environment. We have to enhance the capacity of ICT to improve access, quality, and management of education and training. Ensure acquisition of required knowledge and skills, and improve completion rate at all levels. Accelerate process, gender parity and equality. Launch comprehensive and effective literacy programs. Strengthen the science and math curricula. Expand TVET at all levels, strengthen linkages. Revitalize and expand tertiary education, research and innovation. Promote peace education and conflict prevention. Improve management of education system. And the two strategic objective is to set up a coalition of stakeholders to facilitate and support activities resulting from CESA 12 to 25 implementation. And here, one of the specific objective of CESA is aimed at creating a new African citizen who will be an effective change agent for the African sustainable development. CESA also aims at setting up qualitative system of education and training to provide the African continent with efficient human resources adapted to African core value and capable of achieving the visions and ambition of the EU. So CESA is also an education model for African learners in the 21st century, creating education for wealth. So under this, we establish 12 thematic clusters for the implementation framework, which we call the stakeholders engagement. And this provide each education stakeholder the opportunity to make best contribution to education and training in Africa. And here, this is where we open the door for the involvement of the civil society organizations in the area of education. And one of the things they do is to secure high-level institutional engagement, to promote multi-sectoral approaches, to jointly identify and develop strategic initiatives, and to identify and mobilize education champions. They need to recognize and celebrate achievement. And on this, we also established the African Union Continental Teachers Award to recognize our teachers as facilitators of learning. And why do we establish these clusters? The cluster constitutes an institutional platform for stakeholder engagement. As I said earlier, they are operationalizing the CESA strategic objectives and mandated, and because our division is mandated to transform African education from early childhood education to tertiary education, and to deliver the human capital required for Agenda 2063. And the added value of cluster includes mobilizing technical and financial resources for the implementation, documenting and sharing best practices, providing technical guidance and support to members, develop continental framework, standards, guidance for education development for thematic area. And have pieces of member states, the role of REX in CESA, and the place of partners in CESA. So the member state, they are in the chief implementer of CESA. REX promote alignment of regional framework with CESA, and they partner align support program with CESA at continental, regional, and national level. And so far, collectively, we have had some achievements, and one of them is increase access to education, improve quality of education, promotion of vocational education and skill development. CESA has fostered greater regional cooperation in education, facilitating the sharing of best practices, resources, and amongst country. CESA has driven the integration of ICT and digital education into education system. And this is the reason we have developed the digital education strategy for member states. CESA has also played a crucial role in for increased investment in education across Africa. CESA has also prioritized gender equality in education, aiming to eliminate gender disparity in access, retention, and performance. And in this case, we have the Women and Girls Cluster. The African Union has established the Center for Women and Girls Education in Ouagadougou. CESA has also a monitoring and evaluation system to track progress, identify challenges in the implementation of educational policies and programs. And we have worked on the CESA review based on the report of monitoring and evaluation. And we have also seen some challenges that are solved for the AU team of the year 2024. We have seen the poverty that has the main challenge of that obscuring the growth and potential of millions of children across Africa. We have been hearing learning poverty, and statistically, we have seen that almost 90% of sub-Saharan African kids fail to acquire basic reading skill by age 10. And this is very severe and in fragile context, reaching over 90% in countries like DRC and Niger. And we have also seen that, so all these have been developed in some platform. You know, the learning poverty is often left, we've seen that it's often left unseen, and it has had drastic effect on countries and African development. And as a result, the learning poverty drew a serious attention and was discussed in many platforms. And one of the platforms it was discussed was the fourth ordinary session of the Specialized Technical Committee on Education, Science, and Technology. And the STC EST4 declaration recommended education to be the AU Team of the Year 2024. And in the Transforming Education Summit in 2022, it was also recommended. And at the department level, this was presented to the permanent representative to the AU and the Executive Council. And the team was approved and adopted and came with specific theme: educate an African fit for the 21st century, building resilience education system for increased access to inclusive learning, inclusive lifelong quality and relevant learning in Africa. And the purpose and prospect of the team is to regalvanize member states towards CESA and SDG 4 targets achievement, is to mobilize government and development partners to rethink education models and skills development in Africa, and to implement the declaration from the STC4, the UN Transforming Education Summit, and the high-level event on Transforming Education Summit. And also there was a youth manifesto on Transforming Education Summit in Africa. And all these, they are driving at SDG 4 and CESA 16 to 25 target. And we also see we have thematic working group. The AU is the chair. We have the co-chair, which is the UNESCO. We have the rapporteur, which is UNICEF. And then we have the CESA thematic clusters. We have some education partners, which are also part of the implementation thematic group. And the process of the AU 2024 is we have the inauguration of the technical working group on the team. We received and we consolidated the input from partners, the presentation to the policy organ, the PRC and Executive Council. We review the consolidated input by partners, adoption, and the pre-launch. The pre-launch was held February 2024 during the AU Head of States and Government Summit. And this is where we are going. We have 10 outcomes of the team of the year, 10 outcomes. And the first outcome is to encourage teaching professional reforms. The second outcome is to emphasize investment in STEM education and foundational learning. The third one is to strengthen and accelerate capacity to teach African history. And the fourth one is to accelerate the implementation of TVET and higher education in Africa. The fifth one is to implement digital solutions in education. And the sixth one is healthy and conducive learning environment for learners. And the seventh one is to enhance and protect the right of the marginalized group, including girls' education. And the eighth one is to enhance education management information system and labor market data collection, analysis and usage. And the ninth one is to establish and strengthen multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholders partnership for education. And the 10th one is to strengthen resource mobilization for increased sustainable financing and investment in education. So this one, we need to do resource mobilization through donor engagement and advocacy, launch and operationalize the African Education, Science and Technology Innovation Fund. We also need to advocate for equitable gender response, inclusive and efficient for budget allocation and utilization. So those are the 10 key outcomes of the theme of the year. And we have some proposed spotlight activities that are coordination and oversight. We have the technical conferences. We have production of knowledge, product, exchange programs, country, community level action. We need to strengthen structure and platform, training, capacity building, and a high-level policy dialogue in education. And the expected results, the Continental Spotlight on building resilient education system, concrete, impactful action in AU member states, because we need to begin to do the talks. You know, we are tired of talking the talk and no action is done, is taken. Then there need to be concrete, impactful action in our member state. We also need to address the constrained education financing landscape and effective, long-lasting system-wide transformational strategies needs to take place. So, and the last slide I have here is the continental and global commemorative events, which we have lined up to speak to the theme of the year. We have the International Day of Education, the African Union Summit Day, the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, African Day of School Feeding, Conference of African Ministers of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, African Regional Forum for Sustainable Development, Girls in ICT, African Day, Day of the African Child, and so on and so forth. This is all what we have. I think I've shared the presentation with the Commission. So if anyone is interested in the presentation, it can be shared. Thank you very much for your time and for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Olabode. From that presentation, we've had issues to do with the overview of the SESA 16 to 25. And I believe it has set the tone for this panel discussion. And without much ado, I'm going to request the Vice Chair to lead us in discussing the issue of the education of the girl child, opportunities and challenges. Vice Chair, you have 10 minutes.
Much, Honorable Commissioner Menga. Honorable Commissioners, I will stand on existing protocols in the interest of time. Panelists that are there with us. I think after that very broad overview from your introductory remarks and from Dr. Stevens, it's fitting because you've already given a general overview of the status of education as it affects vulnerable people in Africa. And this includes women and children within the continent. So I'm really happy to be sharing my insights on the right to education for the girl child, about the opportunities and the challenges in terms of the work we do at the African Union and my mechanism as a special rapporteur on the rights of women in Africa in particular. The presentation I'll be giving will shed light on the current status, opportunities and challenges regarding girls' education in Africa, emphasizing the importance of ensuring equal access to education for all. It is actually quite clear that education is a fundamental human right and a powerful tool for empowerment, social inclusion, and sustainable development. In particular, girls' rights to education is essential for their empowerment and development. However, despite significant progress in recent years, girls in Africa continue to face numerous barriers to accessing quality education. And I repeat, quality education. This presentation will delve into the multifaceted nature of these challenges and explore the potential opportunities for transformative change. I'll just go straight to give an overview and comprehensive analysis of the obstacles that hinder girls' education across Africa. And these obstacles will reveal the interconnectedness of the challenges, thus highlighting the intersectionality of rights as it relates to women's rights and girls' rights. These challenges can vary in intensity and prevalence across different countries and regions, but they collectively contribute to the educational gap. And I've just highlighted a few of them. Gender-based discrimination and social norms. Deep-rooted gender inequalities and discrimination perpetuate the notion that girls' education is less important than boys. Traditional beliefs often prioritize girls, domestic roles, and early marriage over their schooling. So we prefer girls actually taking part in domestic roles and getting married as soon as possible as opposed to going to school. Harmful practices like female genital mutilation, that is what we use as once the girls are mutilated, they're ready for marriage. So child marriage, gender-based violence, all of this restrict girls' access to education. Poverty and economic barriers also, even though this affects everyone, but poverty remains a significant barrier to girls' education because we find that many families struggle to afford school fees, uniform, textbooks, and other educational expenses. Girls from impoverished backgrounds are often compelled to contribute to household chores and income generation, limiting their ability to attend school regularly. This means that where resources are limited, there's always a preference for boys, and the girls will be relegated to doing domestic chores, and at a very early stage, actually doing chores that are considered to be bringing income for the family, whereas the boys will be given the opportunity to go to school. Linked to this also is the lack of accessible and safe schools. Inadequate educational infrastructure, particularly in rural and marginalized areas, and even within some urban communities, poses significant challenges to girls' education. Insufficient school facilities, long distances to school, lack of transportation options makes it difficult for girls to access education. Furthermore, the absence of separate and safe sanitation facilities in schools disproportionately affects girls, leading to increased absenteeism and dropouts. Girl-friendly schools are very scarce, and because of the nature of girls, you find that girls almost spend a lot of time at home because the facilities they need are not available within the school environment. Linked to this also is limited educational resources and quality. Unequal distribution of educational resources, including qualified teachers, textbooks, and teaching materials, disproportionately affects girls' education. Schools in remote areas often lack basic amenities, experienced teachers, and updated curricula. Not only updated, but relevant curricula. Inadequate quality of education hampers girls' learning outcomes and hinders their long-term educational attainment. Last, at the beginning, I referred to the issue of intersectionality. Now this brings me to issues like early marriage and teenage pregnancy. Child marriage and early pregnancies are prevalent in many African countries and significantly disrupts girls' education. It's obvious that when girls marry at a young age and become mothers, the educational opportunities are curtailed due to increased responsibilities and social expectation, and they're not able to realize their full potential. Early marriage often leads to early dropout rates and limited girls' chances of pursuing higher education. The same happens to teenage pregnancy, despite the prescription in the Maputo Protocol that girls who actually find themselves pregnant at the early stage should be integrated into schools. But this is not available in most schools and in most environments. Gender-based violence and insecurity also causes a lot of problems for girls, and this includes sexual harassment within the school environment meted out by even the people who actually are supposed to take care of the children. So issues of safeguarding become a problem within the school environment. Assault, abduction, we all know what is happening in some of the communities where, girls are abducted, typically in Nigeria, the Boko Haram incident where girls are abducted within the school environment and carried into the bush and turned into wives and, should I say, slaves. It creates an unsafe learning environment for girls. Fear of violence and insecurity on the way to school or within the school premises deters girls from attending classes because parents will actually keep them at home. The lack of protective measures and inadequate response mechanisms further exacerbate the problem. Limited access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health education also is another problem because actually it denies girls the essential knowledge about their bodies, reproductive health, and rights. And this knowledge gaps contributes to high rates of teenage pregnancy, sexually transmitted diseases, and other health challenges leading to school dropout rates among girls. These are some of the challenges identified, but it is clear that addressing these challenges will not just be one size fits all and will not require just one solution. These obstacles, addressing them requires a multifaceted approach that involves, now just suggest some of the things that we need to put in place: policy reforms and legislation to promote gender equality and eliminate discriminative practices, investment in quality education infrastructure, including construction of schools and provision of essential services, targeted scholarships and financial support to alleviate economic barriers for disadvantaged girls, awareness campaign to challenge harmful social norms and promote the values of girls' education, comprehensive sexuality education to empower girls with knowledge and skills to form informed decisions about their bodies and health, and collaboration between government, civil society organizations, communities, and international partners to implement holistic strategies and monitor progress. By systematically addressing these obstacles, it is possible to create an enabling environment that ensures that every girl in Africa has access to quality education, enabling them to fulfill their potential and to contribute to developing their communities, their nations, and the continent of Africa as a whole. So what are the opportunities, bearing in mind the obstacles we highlighted and also the strategies we've identified in terms of addressing these obstacles? I will start with policy initiatives and legal frameworks. Government can develop and implement policy prioritizing gender equality in education. This includes eliminating discriminatory practices, promoting girls' enrollment and retention, and ensuring equal access to resources and opportunities. Strengthening legal frameworks and enforcing laws that protect girls' rights to education is crucial for creating an enabling environment. Targeted investments. Increased investment in education, specifically targeting girls' education, can have a transformative impact. Allocating resources to build and improve school infrastructure, provide essential learning materials, and train and recruit qualified teachers can help create safe and conducive learning environment for girls. Scholarships, stipends, and financial support programs can address economic barriers and incentivize girls' enrollment and retention. Teacher training and gender-responsive pedagogy. Training teachers in gender-responsive pedagogy equips them with the knowledge and skills to address the specific needs of girls in the classrooms. This includes fostering inclusive teaching methods, promoting girls' participation and engagement, and challenging gender stereotypes. Empowering teachers to create inclusive and supportive learning environments that positively impacts girl educational experiences and outcomes. Community engagement and awareness is also very important. Engaging communities, parents, and local leaders is crucial for changing attitudes and behaviors towards girls' education. Awareness campaigns can highlight the importance of girls' education, challenge harmful social norms and stereotypes, and emphasize the long-term benefits for individuals and communities. Engaging with parents and communities can also address concerns build trust, and encourage active support for girls. Partnerships and collaboration. Collaboration between government, civil society organizations, the private sector, and international partners is essential for advancing girls' education. Partnerships can leverage resources, expertise, and innovative approaches to address the multifaceted challenges girls face. Collaborative efforts can support mentorship programs, vocational training, digital learning platforms, and initiatives targeting specific marginalized groups, ensuring that no girl is left behind, irrespective of their circumstances and wherever they find themselves. Integration of technology. The increasing availability of technology and digital resources presents opportunities to enhance girls' education. Integrating technology in classrooms, providing access to online educational materials, and leveraging the digital platform for distance learning can help overcome geographical barriers and improve educational access for girls in remote areas. It is important to ensure that technology initiatives are inclusive and reach girls from all socioeconomic backgrounds. Research and data-driven approaches are also very important. Should invest in research and data collection on girls' education, and this can inform evidence-based policies and intervention. Robust data can identify specific barriers and gaps, monitor progress, and evaluate the effectiveness of programs. Research can also contribute to a deeper understanding of the intersectional factors that affect girls' education, enable them more targeted and tailored approaches. So these opportunities actually will involve a significant contribution of all stakeholders and can make a significant stride in advancing girls' education in Africa. How many minutes do I have? Sorry? 0 minutes. Okay, very well. In that case, I just want to wrap up by saying that as the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa, together with the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, we're entrusted with responsibility to monitor implementation of the Maputo Protocol and the African Children's Charter regarding the relevant provision relating to girls' education. And we collaborate a lot in doing the work that we do and we're ready to collaborate with the ECOSOC committee in terms of working closer in ensuring that the realization of girls' education within the continent. I'll make my paper available. I have a lot of information there, but I'm also mindful of that we're in a panel and I don't want to consume all the time. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Vice Chair. There you have it. We've had a presentation on education for the girl child, opportunities and challenges, and we'll go straight into the next presentation, which is the right to education and provision of suitable educational systems for persons with disabilities. And Commissioner Sow is going to lead us in discussing this important topic. Commissioner Sow, you have 10 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci pour l'opportunité qu'il m'est donnée de participer à ce débat et de faire cette communication qui initialement devait être présentée par Madame Marie-Louise Aboumou, présidente du groupe de travail sur les personnes handicapées et les personnes âgées. Alors, les intervenants qui m'ont précédé se sont apaisantis très longuement sur l'importance du droit à l'éducation, qui est le thème général cette année, choisi par les organes de l'Union africaine. Je ne reviendrai pas sur cette importance. Vous me permettrez simplement d'aborder directement la question spécifique qui m'a été demandée de traiter, c'est-à-dire le droit à l'éducation et la mise en place de systèmes éducatifs adaptés aux personnes handicapées. Je voudrais, dans mon orientation, avoir une perspective juridique et en essayant d'identifier les fondements de la dialectique entre l'éducation et la prise en compte de la situation particulière des personnes vivant avec un handicap. Le postulat de départ qui est le nôtre est que, de façon incontestable, l'État est débiteur de l'éducation, de l'obligation d'assurer une éducation envers ses ressortissants. Il découle également de cette obligation que c'est à l'État qu'il incombe la responsabilité d'adapter les systèmes éducatifs aux besoins spécifiques des personnes en situation de vulnérabilité dont notamment les personnes vivant avec un handicap. Donc, de façon générale, nous pensons que ce sujet pouvait être développé à travers deux axes principaux. Dans un premier axe, nous pensons que l'obligation de mettre en place un système éducatif adapté pour les personnes handicapées est une obligation juridique pour les États. Et dans le deuxième axe, nous essayerons de montrer qu'il s'agit également d'une exigence morale dans une société qui se veut juste, inclusive et égalitaire. Le premier axe de ma réflexion, Monsieur le Président, nous mènera donc à faire en fait l'état des lieux du fondement juridique de cette obligation qui pèse sur les États de mettre en place un système éducatif adapté à la situation particulière des personnes vivant avec un handicap. Et pour cela, nous commencerons naturellement par la Charte africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, qui est notre instrument juridique de référence, qui, en son article 17, vous l'avez dit dans votre propos introductif, garantit le droit à l'éducation. Et ce droit est soumis à d'autres principes que l'on retrouve dans cette charte, c'est-à-dire le principe d'égalité et le principe de non-discrimination, tel qu'il ressort des articles 2 et 3 de la charte africaine. En effet, à l'instar de chaque individu, les personnes vivant avec un handicap doivent également pouvoir jouir du droit à l'éducation sans aucune entrave. Mais en plus de ce fondement juridique qu'on trouve dans la charte proprement dite, le protocole à la charte sur les droits de l'homme et des peuples relatifs aux droits des personnes handicapées, adopté en 2018, est venu consolider cette base juridique en énonçant un certain nombre d'obligations et de principes standards dans son article 16 notamment, qui est consacré au droit à l'éducation. Donc, au terme de cette disposition, l'article 16 nous dit que toute personne handicapée a droit à l'éducation. Il ajoute que les États parties assurent aux personnes handicapées le droit à l'éducation sur la base de l'égalité avec les autres. Et en troisième point, l'article 16 nous dit que les États parties prennent les mesures raisonnables, appropriées et efficaces pour assurer une éducation complète et de qualité pour les personnes handicapées. À l'analyse, il ressort de cette disposition qu'un certain nombre d'obligations a été mises à la charge des États. Nous en citerons quelques-uns. Notamment, il incombe aux États, sur la base de cet article 16, d'assurer une formation initiale et de base aux personnes handicapées, ainsi qu'en cas de besoin, de leur assurer une formation professionnelle qualifiante et une formation continue, s'il y a lieu. Il incombe également aux États membres de veiller à ce que les établissements d'enseignement soient équipés de matériel didactique et d'équipements nécessaires à l'éducation des élèves handicapés et à leurs besoins spécifiques. Il incombe également aux États, en vertu de cet article 16, d'orienter l'éducation des personnes handicapées de manière à favoriser leur participation et leur inclusion dans leur société, dans la société. En substance, tel qu'il est structuré, l'article 16 comporte des composantes qui peuvent être déclinées en 4 points. Dans son premier alinéa, il pose la garantie du droit à l'éducation. Chaque personne, chaque enfant a droit à l'éducation. Chaque enfant handicapé également doit pouvoir bénéficier de ce droit. Dans son alinéa 2, l'article 16 rappelle la notion fondamentale d'égalité, c'est-à-dire que les enfants vivant avec un handicap ne doivent pas être exclus de ce droit à l'éducation. Ils doivent en jouir au même titre que les autres enfants qui ne sont pas handicapés. Et dans son alinéa 3, l'article 16 énumère les composantes standards de l'action des États parties en ce qui concerne le droit à l'éducation des personnes handicapées. Enfin, l'alinéa 4 de cette disposition de l'article 16 cite les axes stratégiques sur lesquels l'éducation des personnes doit être orientée. Mais le droit à l'éducation est également garanti par d'autres instruments juridiques que l'on trouve dans le système international. On va dans l'intérêt du temps en citer juste quelques-uns. Je citerai d'abord l'article 24 de la Convention relative aux droits des personnes handicapées qui annonce que les États parties reconnaissent le droit des personnes handicapées à l'éducation, en vue d'assurer l'exercice de ce droit sans discrimination et sur la base de l'égalité des chances. Ces États doivent faire en sorte que leur système éducatif pourvoie à l'insertion scolaire à tous les niveaux aux personnes handicapées. Cette disposition a d'ailleurs fait l'objet d'une observation générale numéro 2, dans laquelle, en fait, son sens et sa portée ont été précisés. Il y a également le pacte international relatif aux droits économiques, sociaux et culturels, qui, en ses articles 2 et 13, en fait, pose les principes d'un droit à l'éducation, d'un droit à l'éducation adapté pour les personnes vivant avec un handicap. La Convention relative aux droits de l'enfant également, en ses articles 2 et 28, pose la même obligation à l'encontre des États. On peut également citer en dernier lieu la Charte africaine des droits et du bien-être de l'enfant, qui, en son article 13, énonce que tout enfant qui est mentalement ou physiquement handicapé a droit à des mesures spéciales de protection correspondant à ses besoins physiques et moraux et dans les conditions qui garantissent sa dignité et qui favorisent son autonomie et sa participation active à la vie communautaire. Donc, on le voit bien, Monsieur le Président, garantir une éducation adaptée, un système éducatif adapté aux personnes handicapées est une obligation légale pour chaque État membre. Le deuxième terme de ma réflexion, c'est de montrer également que ce droit à une éducation adaptée pour les personnes handicapées, en fait, est une, disons, exigence morale. C'est une exigence morale dans une société qui se veut juste, inclusive et équilibrée. Cela nous amène peut-être à une réflexion, disons, philosophique, mais qui, pour autant, ne nous éloigne pas des fondements juridiques que nous venons d'évoquer. Il appartient, dans un premier temps, à l'État, en fait, de s'adapter à la situation particulière des personnes vivant avec un handicap. Cela veut dire quoi? Cela veut dire qu'aujourd'hui, dans une société juste, équilibrée et inclusive, on ne doit pas demander aux personnes vivant avec un handicap de s'adapter à la situation générale du système éducatif et de faire face personnellement aux contraintes et aux contingences exigées que leur exigent en fait ces situations générales de l'éducation. Il appartient à l'État de s'adapter à la situation particulière de ces personnes vivant avec un handicap. Je le dis pourquoi je vais m'appuyer sur un exemple que j'ai vécu personnellement il y a quelques années. Lorsque je faisais mes enseignements en Master 2 à l'université Cheikh Anta Diop de Dakar, j'avais parmi les étudiants un malvoyant. Et un jour, quand il a fallu faire les évaluations, le dernier jour, il ne pouvait pas simplement faire l'examen parce qu'il n'y avait pas le dispositif en fait adapté pour qu'il puisse recevoir son sujet en braille. Il a dû par la suite me contacter et me demander si je pouvais l'interroger oralement et que la note qui serait la sienne tiendrait lieu de note pour son évaluation annuelle. Cela a été fait. Est-ce qu'il a été avantagé? Est-ce qu'il a été désavantagé? Je ne saurais le dire, mais ce que je retiens, c'est que le système ne s'est pas adapté à sa situation particulière, alors que c'est ce qui devrait être le cas lorsque nous voulons être dans une société juste, équilibrée et inclusive. La deuxième réflexion que je voudrais faire à cet égard, c'est que dans une société juste et équilibrée également, il faudrait qu'il y ait une égalité, en fait une égalité de tous les citoyens devant les sages publics. Imaginez les parents d'élèves qui ont des enfants handicapés, qui cotisent à l'impôt au même titre que les autres parents, donc qui participent au bien-être des enfants valides, mais qui ne peuvent pas bénéficier, eux, disons, d'aménagements adaptés à la situation particulière de leurs enfants. Cela me pose un réel problème d'équilibre, un réel problème d'équité dans nos sociétés. C'est ce qui me conduit à dire que de façon générale, les États ont aussi cette obligation morale d'assurer en fait une situation, d'assurer en fait le développement, un développement épanoui pour les élèves qui sont dans le système éducatif et qui traînent un handicap. Donc, Monsieur le Président, voilà les deux axes de réflexion que je voudrais développer, que j'ai voulu partager avec vous en termes de contribution à ce débat. Je vous remercie, je vous rends la parole.
Thank you, Commissioner So. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a presentation on the right to education and provision of suitable educational systems for persons with disabilities. And without, again, further ado, we will go straight to deal with the issue on access to education for indigenous populations or communities in Africa. Dr. Dita Ogana will lead us into discussing this important topic. Dr. Ogana, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the floor. I'm delighted to be part of this panel to discuss the African Union theme for 2024 on the right to education. My presentation will focus on the education for indigenous communities in Africa, but I'll also draw examples from experiences of the Africans that were taken as slaves, and yet they were able to make serious breakthroughs despite all the discrimination and without formal education. Ladies and gentlemen, according to the Working Group on Indigenous Affairs, the number of indigenous people in Africa is estimated to be 50 million. Most of them are nomadic and semi-nomadic pastoralists and hunter-gatherers. Indigenous people in Africa face multiple challenges, including dispossessions of their land, territories, and resources, forced assimilation into the way of life of the dominant groups, marginalization, poverty, and illiteracy. Most of the indigenous populations live in rural areas that are poor, undeveloped, with no or minimal infrastructure. While most of them live in rural areas, various research studies and statistics have found that educational landscape in rural Africa is marked by enduring challenges that hinder access, quality, equality in education. In particular, I like to talk about the 3 A's: lack of access, lack of availability of quality education, and unaffordable education. Before moving into the legal instruments that recognize indigenous people's rights in education in Africa, let me just raise a question or put some criticism on the approach we have been using on education. The notion that formal education is the only way out, that it is superior than the other forms of education, could be the problem that we are facing in the continent, with a lot of students being spun out of universities, high schools, and yet they cannot be able to provide for themselves. There are questions that we are now asking ourselves. Is this formal education relevant? Whether it is superior or not? Does it capture the inherent education that a student takes to school before they are brainwashed? In the African culture and tradition, there is a knowledge system that a child is taken through even before they go to school. And we need to ask ourselves, what happens to this knowledge our children take to school? By the time they finish their graduates, do they still have that knowledge set in their mind, or has it been brainwashed? Ladies and gentlemen, the legal instruments recognizing indigenous people's rights in Africa are found at different levels. Efforts have been made at continental level, especially within the ambit of the African Union, to ensure the promotion and protection of indigenous people's rights in as far as access to education is concerned. Several human rights legal instruments within the continent guarantee the rights of indigenous people's education. In that regard, Article 17.1 of the African Charter affirms every individual shall have the right to education. Furthermore, Article 71.2 of the Charter talks about cultural life being part of that education. Further, the Charter on Rights and Welfare of the Child affirms the right of education or the right of children to enjoy equal access to free and compulsory education. It also requires states to take measures to address dropout rates and special measures in favor of disadvantaged children, such as children from indigenous communities. The protocol to the Charter on the human and people's rights on the rights of women, the Maputo Protocol, also imposes obligations on states to take measures to eliminate discrimination against women in relation to access to education and to address the poor enrollment and retention of girls in school. However, challenges in accessing education exist despite these legal instruments. For example, the international human rights law underpinned by the principle of equality guarantees the right to education for everyone. Yet, according to a study by the Indigenous Minorities Rights Groups done in 2009, demonstrated that majority of children who are out of school worldwide are minority and are indigenous children. In general, learners and teachers in rural areas in Africa, where most indigenous communities live, face a lot of challenges in form of the 3 A's I mentioned about: access, availability of teachers, infrastructure, educational resources, including textbooks, and so quality of education is very much undermined. These factors are compounded by other factors that hinder access to education in rural schools, such as influence of cultural beliefs on education participation and other social cultural challenges, such as the ones we've been talking about. The girls dropout is not just dropout, but some of them go through FGM, then they cannot go to school because they are in a marriageable state. Others challenges to do with the nomadic nature. Communities move up and down, and sometimes they carry along their families and they drop out of school. Indigenous people tend to live less, to have less access to modern education than other groups. Their education is often does not incorporate, their education does not often get incorporated in the school curricula, teaching methods, and does not recognize their community's histories, cultures, traditional language, and traditional knowledge, as I earlier alluded. The UN report 2009 by Human Rights Council, a report on expert mechanism on rights of indigenous communities, identified challenges of the right to education, indigenous education, and identified a number of serious concerns and barriers to realizing the right to indigenous education. The study found out indigenous people felt lack of control over their educational initiatives aimed at their children. They weren't being consulted when these programs and services were being designed and implemented. As a result, they found that the programs put in place were not being delivered by indigenous people themselves. They were available, but they were not available in their languages and did not respect their history, traditional knowledge, and culture. That report demonstrates that designing education programs for indigenous children, especially women and girls, must recognize and consider their particular needs and the barriers they face in accessing quality education. Another finding from Amnesty International on education gap between indigenous children and their peers showed that the knowledge gap when it comes to access to technology exists. This lower level of access of computers and internet to the indigenous community was demonstrated very well during the COVID-19 period, when the pandemic closed down schools. Many indigenous communities and children were completely blocked out because they did not have access to internet and they could not be able to participate in the virtual life that was governing the world at that time. The importance of education to indigenous people cannot be emphasized enough. There are a couple of recommendations, but before I go to recommendations, I wanted to give an example from Namibia on what a government, a state party can do for our indigenous community. In Namibia, the government made sure that the educational language policy provided for children to be instructed in their mother tongue for the first 3 years of formal schooling, with a gradual switch to English in the 4th year. In furtherance of that policy, and in collaboration with civil society in Namibia, the Ministry of Education launched the Nyai Nyai Village School project, which is a successful model of integrating the traditional, culturally appropriate mother tongue education of the San indigenous children with formal education. Ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude, I wanted to just go back to the notion that I talked about, whether everything modern is formal. And I wanted to give a few examples from the African American history. When you look at the inventions in the United States of America, particularly in the height of slave trade, you realize that a lot of inventions and discoveries came from the slaves. And so one wonders if they did not have access to formal education, they were discriminated upon, they were not getting the kind of support they're required to get to grow their minds and innovate. How did they do it? And I think the answer comes from the knowledge that they carried from the continent. They carried that intelligence with them, and when they were put in situations where they could not have access to other form of education, they resorted to their own education. Is it a wonder that what we know as the Ford car, the Henry Ford car that was discovered in 1909, 1908, or launched in 1908, that actually Mr. Ford got that idea or bought that copyright from an African-American, Frederick Douglass Patterson. Is it a wonder that and this shows that some of the examples are men and women. A woman, Alice Parker, discovered the powered furnace in 1919. The helicopter as we know it was discovered by an African, Paul E. Williams. And so when you look at the other many discoveries, the air conditioner, the elevator, the guitar, the sprinkler system, the roller coaster, peanut butter, brooms, hair combs, all these can be traced to African Americans. And yet they do not have access to formal education. So that brings me to the conclusion that when we talk about education, we should not be blind and we should be open-minded. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, let me say that states must disaggregate data so that indigenous people's access to education in Africa is accurately recorded. National curriculum and materials should be intercultural and include accurate information insofar as indigenous people's cultures, histories, experiences are concerned. States must support and empower indigenous people to take lead in developing quality education systems. In that regard, indigenous people must identify their own educational priorities and curricula and should be involved in development of the material. Finally, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, states must make an effort to ensure that the registration of births of indigenous children is captured. A birth certificate is a very important document for a child to be able to prove its birth, right, and place, and to make that child be enrolled in a formal school, a require a national identity card and maybe passport. So takes me back to my earlier recommendation on the importance of having our census indicators and our census tools capturing indigenous peoples in their communities, so that every year the countries can be able to know where the indigenous people are, whether they are migrating, whether they're nomadic or not. And that will help us also to deal with member states that feel that there are no indigenous people in their countries, because I think a good census report would make it very clear who is where, whether they're indigenous or not, and then we can now be able to provide services to them. I thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ghana. That was a presentation on access to education for indigenous populations, communities in Africa. We will now go straight into hearing a presentation on the access to education for refugees and asylum seekers, which will be done by Commissioner Salma Shashi Salfa. You have 10 minutes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Mwandenga. Honorable commissaire, distingués représentants des États, membres des organisations internationales et régionales, membres de la société civile, les INDH, membres du secrétariat de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, interprètes, bonjour. Salamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président, de m'avoir associé à ce panel pour partager avec vous une présentation sur l'accès des réfugiés et demandeurs d'asile à l'éducation, défis et perspectives. L'éducation est l'or et l'arme la plus puissante pour changer le monde, disait Nelson Mandela. Ainsi que rappelé dans de multiples instruments internationaux et régionaux, le droit à l'éducation est un droit fondamental, reconnu à tous, sans aucune forme de discrimination. De la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme, en passant par le Pacte international sur les droits économiques, sociaux et culturels, ou encore par la Charte africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, ainsi que la Charte africaine pour les droits et le bien-être de l'enfant africain, pour ne citer que ces exemples. La particularité première du droit à l'éducation est qu'il s'agit à la fois d'un droit fondamental en soi, mais que dans le même temps, il s'agit d'une des clés de l'exercice des autres droits inhérents à la personne humaine, en encourant à l'autonomisation de l'individu, sa protection et l'élargissement de ses horizons. Le droit à l'éducation est un droit qui ouvre la porte aux autres droits. Et pourtant, pour de multiples raisons, des millions d'enfants et de jeunes sont toujours privés de ce droit à l'éducation, de leur droit d'apprendre. La pauvreté, les longues distances à parcourir pour se rendre à l'école, le manque d'enseignants et d'infrastructures, l'inégalité entre les sexes, la discrimination sont quelques-unes des raisons pour lesquelles des millions de personnes sont encore privées de ce droit. Tous ces obstacles sont encore multipliés et aggravés par le défi auquel est confronté un nombre croissant, de plus en plus croissant, je dirais, de déplacés de force, en particulier les réfugiés et les demandeurs d'asile. Sans faute pourtant de leur part, ils se retrouvent non seulement hors de l'école, mais aussi hors de leur foyer, de leur communauté, de leur pays et de leur culture. Pour eux, apprendre peut devenir ou devient presque et souvent une mission impossible. Pourtant, le droit des réfugiés et les demandeurs d'asile à l'éducation est consacré par la Convention de Genève de 1951 sur le statut des réfugiés dans son article 22, à laquelle près de 50 États africains sont partis, ainsi que dans la Déclaration de New York de 2016 sur les réfugiés et les migrants, ou encore dans le Pacte pour le pacte mondial sur les réfugiés de 2018. La jouissance du droit à l'éducation pour les réfugiés et les demandeurs d'asile est d'autant plus nécessaire, car ce droit protège d'abord les enfants et les jeunes réfugiés des risques d'exposition aux abus et à certaines violences, tels le recrutement forcé dans les groupes armés, le travail des enfants, l'exploitation sexuelle ou encore les mariages précoces. L'accès à l'éducation, par ailleurs, renforce l'autonomie des réfugiés en leur donnant des connaissances et des compétences nécessaires pour mener une vie productive et indépendante dans la dignité. Enfin, l'accès à l'éducation représente pour les réfugiés et les demandeurs d'asile une source d'épanouissement, leur permettant de reconstruire leur vie et souvent celle de leur famille. Le thème de l'année de l'Union africaine 2024 concernant l'éducation est pour nous une occasion particulière pour revenir sur les principaux défis rencontrés par les réfugiés et les demandeurs d'asile en Afrique pour l'accès à l'éducation, mais dans le même temps pour mettre en exergue les principales perspectives leur permettant une meilleure jouissance de leur droit à l'éducation, notamment avec l'augmentation accrue du nombre des réfugiés et demandeurs d'asile sur notre continent. Si, comme cela a été rappelé, des progrès significatifs ont été réalisés pour l'accès à l'éducation en Afrique au cours des dernières décennies, selon le dernier rapport mondial de suivi de l'éducation de 2023 de l'UNESCO. Le rapport de 2023 sur l'éducation des réfugiés du Haut Commissariat des Nations Unies pour les réfugiés HCR révèle quant à lui qu'en dépit de certaines avancées et réalisations, plus de la moitié des 15 millions d'enfants réfugiés dans le monde en âge d'être scolarisés n'ont pas accès à une éducation formelle. Nous constatons également, concernant les réfugiés et les demandeurs d'asile, que plus le niveau d'éducation est élevé, plus le droit à l'éducation et à l'égalité des chances se réduit, et que les possibilités d'étudier dans le secondaire et l'enseignement supérieur sont et restent encore très limitées. Ainsi, le taux de scolarisation des réfugiés est de 65% pour les enfants en âge de fréquenter l'école primaire. Il est de 41% pour l'école secondaire et seulement de 6% pour l'enseignement supérieur, ce dernier n'étant pas un droit universellement reconnu à l'instar de l'enseignement primaire. Ceci peut être dû à des raisons multiples. D'abord, les barrières linguistiques, mais également le coût financier des études, les difficultés administratives pour l'obtention des documents attestant du statut ou de la situation juridique, le manque de bourses d'études ouvertes à cette catégorie des personnes, etc. Il apparaît ainsi clairement que beaucoup reste à faire pour assurer un accès réel, effectif et total des réfugiés et des demandeurs d'asile à l'éducation en Afrique. Nous souhaitons également souligner dans ce contexte que la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples a toujours établi dans ses priorités l'accès à l'éducation pour tous sur le continent africain. Ainsi, dans sa résolution 346 de 2016 sur le droit à l'éducation en Afrique, la Commission constatait que malgré le cadre juridique existant en matière de protection du droit à l'éducation, de nombreux enfants, en particulier les filles, les enfants vulnérables tels que les enfants handicapés, les enfants réfugiés, les enfants migrants, les enfants de la rue ou encore les enfants déplacés, ne jouissent pas, à ce jour, d'une égalité avec les autres enfants du droit à l'éducation et ne bénéficient pas des mêmes opportunités. Par ailleurs, dans sa résolution 565 de 2023 sur l'inclusion des réfugiés, des demandeurs d'asile, des déplacés internes et des apatrides dans les systèmes socio-économiques nationaux, les services et les opportunités économiques en Afrique, la Commission appelle à supprimer, je cite, les restrictions qui empêchent l'inclusion sociale et économique des réfugiés, personnes déplacées de force et apatrides, en encourageant les efforts visant à atténuer les impacts juridiques, socio-économiques et environnementaux, notamment par la facilitation de l'accès à l'éducation. Par ailleurs, dans les principes directeurs africains relatifs aux droits de l'homme de tous les migrants, des réfugiés et de demandeurs d'asile, adoptés au cours de la 75e session ordinaire de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples en avril 2023, le principe 29 sur l'éducation dispose expressément que les migrants et leurs enfants ont droit à l'éducation, que les États doivent rendre l'enseignement primaire gratuit, disponible et obligatoire pour les enfants migrants, qu'ils doivent encourager le développement de l'enseignement secondaire et le rendre accessible à tous les migrants sur la base de l'égalité de traitement avec les nationaux, et enfin, qu'ils doivent rendre l'enseignement supérieur également accessible à tous les migrants sur la base de leurs capacités. Les efforts menés par la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples pour assurer un caractère inclusif à l'accès à l'éducation sur le continent africain, y compris pour les réfugiés et les demandeurs d'asile, s'inscrit d'ailleurs dans le cadre global de plusieurs stratégies aussi bien mondiales que régionales, notamment les objectifs du développement durable des Nations unies à horizon 2030, particulièrement son objectif 4, l'agenda 2063 de l'Union africaine, essentiellement son aspiration 1, ou encore l'agenda 2040 pour une Afrique digne de ses enfants, particulièrement son aspiration 6, adoptée par le Comité d'experts africains pour les droits et le bien-être de l'enfant. Monsieur le Président, je voudrais souligner à la fin que la jouissance des réfugiés et des demandeurs d'asile du droit à l'éducation, même si elle représente aujourd'hui un défi majeur, tant sur le plan humanitaire que sur le plan du développement, contribuera non seulement à l'instauration d'une paix durable en Afrique, mais permettra surtout d'atteindre une Afrique prospère, ouverte au monde entier et qui ne laisse personne de côté. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président, et je vous rends la parole.
Commissioner, we will now go into discussion. We have a list of participants who have registered to make interventions, and I shall be calling them one by one. I'll start off with member states. There is Felice Mino Lisboa from Angola. Do we have online? Nothing. Then Pacheco Francisco, also from Angola. Is he online? Nothing. Then we go to NHRI's Safari Runinga Jr. Nothing. Then we have from the African Union organ, Dr. Muhammad Kiari. Nothing. Paul Vinga. Nothing. Hector Egosa. Nothing. Robert Okoto. Is there? Well, you have the time to make your intervention.
Thank you, honorable chairs, NGOs, ladies and gentlemen, for this opportunity to make a short statement in this very august occasion. My name is Robert Akuto Amoafo. I work as the Advocacy Manager for Pan-Africa International Lesbian Gay Association. I'd want to say thank you for this opportunity and to draw the Commission's attention to the great work they have done so far by passing Resolution 275 and Resolution 552. We want to draw the Commission's attention and the attention of the panel about the current rise in criminalization on the continent, which reduces access to education for a lot of sexual and gender minorities on the continent. We want to draw the attention of the Commission of the rise of the anti-gender, anti-rights movement that is continuously causing violence against the community on the continent, and therefore the need to rise and mention issues that governments need to take to ensure the protection of the rights of all individuals as mentioned in the African Charter. We are confident that this commission will continue to work to protect the rights of all persons and not leaving anyone behind as we work towards achieving Agenda 2063 and as we go towards the Summit of the Future to talk about Agenda 2030 in the UN this year at a high-level political forum. We are very grateful that all these things will be taken into consideration and LGBT people on the African continent will not be left behind. We are grateful once again for the work of the Commission on Intersex People for Resolution 552 and hope that this consideration will be done in the work of the Commission at this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will now go to NGOs. Basat Essam, Mad for Peace and Development and Human Rights. You may go ahead, Basan.
Thank you, Honorable Commissioner, for giving me the floor. We would also like to thank all participants for this important panel discussion. Our intervention today is about recommendation to the African Commission and the African Union. Honorable Commissioner, MAT appeals to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to provide technical assistance to the government of Africa in order to help them address the legal and legislative gaps between international and regional commitments to education and between the legal and constitutional system of African states. Second, MAT recommends that the African Commission on Human and People's Rights assist African governments technically to end gender gap in education by launching awareness raising and educational campaigns to eradicate negative phenomena against girls and women education, as well as raise awareness about the social, economic, and physiological value of girls' education. Organize campaigns and advocacy that will make African schools open and safe for all and eliminate all forms of gender-based violence and sexual abuse for girls. Finally, MAT recommends that African Union and its agencies launch new initiatives that would quarter African external debt for education in a way that would allow for the relief of African financial resources and guide them to education. Thank you, Honorable Commissioners.
Thank you very much. We will now call upon the Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch, are they online? Nothing. Then it will be Shomari Omari of YAP, Youth Advisory Panel. Nothing. Then Said Siad Abdullah Hafez Siad Dawish, President and CEO of Forum for Development and Human Rights Dialogue. Not there. I have some questions in French. Unfortunately, I can't read those. But there is one, it says, the current speaker's points about enslaved Africans in the United States of America who weren't credited accordingly is on point. Let us, Africans, indeed remember that African educational wonders and praise our educators with adequate financial resources as much as our presidents, for instance, with gratitude, Portia C. Allen, volunteer senior advocacy coordinator of Her Excellency Alice Akum. Then there is one comment from Curtis Dobler. He says, could you please ask the panelists what obligations they believe states have under Article 13, paragraph 2C of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which all African states have ratified, which reads, higher education shall be made equally accessible to all on the basis of capacity by every appropriate means, and in particular by the progressive introduction of free education. The French one, maybe I'll ask my brother, Commissioner Hatem, can you assist me if you can? Okay. Yes.
L'éducation est la route pour le futur, certes. Hélas, une route jonchée d'énormes obstacles, pourtant c'est dans le terreau de l'éducation, de l'instruction, dans le terreau de la petite enfance, que l'on pourrait aller planter la graine qui va germer les fruits de l'humanité. Humaine, future, un enfant qu'on éduque est un homme qu'on gagne. Le droit à l'éducation ne saurait se contenter d'être une préoccupation occasionnelle, mais une permanente recherche effrénée, constante. La grande problématique restant toujours
And we're particularly concerned about time. We're now
la difficile
move
équation
over to the lunch period.
pour des instruments
Looks like we'll have to cancel the other panel. This went over the time allocated.
amener à convaincre, etc. Pour l'application et les donneurs d'ordre et ceux qui appliquent et même les ménages, acteurs de premier degré, assurer accéder à une éducation.
Thank you. Due to time constraints, we'll have to stop it at that. And perhaps what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the panelists a minute each to make their final comments and possibly answer the question by Curtis Dobler. Starting from in the order in which you made your presentation, starting with the Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable Commissioner. And I just want to reiterate the fact that the right to quality education, in my case, especially for a girl child, is a right that is guaranteed under the Maputo Protocol. Article 12 talks about the right to education and also deals with the issue of elimination of discrimination, equal access of opportunity, eliminating gender stereotype, comprehensive education, supportive measures, and elimination of illiteracy. In the same vein, the African Children's Charter also has a specific article that guarantees the right to education of every child and calls on state parties to take special measures in respect of especially female gifted and disadvantaged children to ensure equal access to education for all sections of the community without any distinction. So maybe to respond to the point raised by Sir Douglas, the fact that governments are primarily responsible, I think to reiterate that, for providing equitable and inclusive education for all. They are the primary duty bearers. Of course, other stakeholders have a role to play, but the primary duty bearers actually are the government. They play a crucial role, and they should prioritize policies that ensure quality education for all. And in my case, I'm prioritizing girls' education to allocate sufficient resources and budgetary resources to ensure we have equitable and accessible quality education, establish monitoring system for evaluation of progress to track progress and gaps, and ensure accountability for actually compliance with all the rights that are provided for in the Maputo Protocol, the African Charter, the African Children's Charter, and all other international instruments that guarantee the right to education. Of course, I would also like to call on civil society to also, complement government's works. Parents and families also are critical stakeholders because they can challenge the stereotypes that we have that actually impede girls' education. Teachers and educators also have a role. It's a multi-sectoral approach. Teachers and educators also have a role to play. We all know the impact our teachers have in our lives. So teachers have a role to play, and they should be able to help challenge all the biases at all levels. Community leaders, local leaders also, because these are the custodians and guardians of culture, and they shape the behavior and attitude of their communities. They have a role to play in actually curbing traditional practices that impede girls' education. So engagement of community leaders is actually very crucial. So basically, in conclusion, I would just say that addressing the challenges and capitalizing on the opportunities requires a comprehensive and collaborative approach involving governments, CSOs, communities, educators, and international partners at all levels. I think I'll end there because I'm concerned about the time that we have available. Thank you very much.
A minute, please. Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je fais évidemment mienne les explications qui ont été données par Madame la vice-présidente par rapport surtout à la question posée sur l'application de l'article 13 du Pacte international relatif aux droits civils et politiques. C'est cet article qui est le siège en fait de cette obligation qui incombe aux États d'assurer une éducation universelle, gratuite, sans aucune discrimination. Mais cet article également reconnaît que l'éducation, en fait, pourvoir au droit à l'éducation doit être apprécié en fonction des moyens dont disposent les États, mais invite quand même les États à tout faire pour que l'éducation soit disponible pour tous les apprenants, quelle que soit leur situation. Je voudrais, concernant la situation particulière des handicapés, profiter des personnes handicapées, profiter de ce panel pour lancer encore un appel aux États pour qu'ils puissent vraiment veiller à l'accessibilité de toutes les écoles, de tous les lieux d'apprentissage, qu'ils puissent assurer une formation des enseignants pour que ceux-ci puissent répondre aux besoins particuliers des apprenants et que les États également mettent en œuvre tout ce qu'il faut pour garantir la participation des organisations de personnes handicapées, la planification et au suivi de l'éducation et de l'apprentissage. Voilà de façon très ramassée les quelques observations que je voulais faire en addition à ma contribution. Merci beaucoup. Commissioner Ogana, 1 minute, parting shots.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mine is if we are going to achieve Agenda 2063, I think member states should change the narrative on education, and the teaching should integrate African history so that our children know about their past. They are not taught about things that are not relevant to them. They should know about the Timbuktu manuscripts. They should know about the kingdoms that were thriving in this continent, about Mansa Musa. These things have disappeared. We went through that education ourselves, but our children are being narrowed down to a very digital and very manicured kind of education, which makes them think that Africa had nothing to offer. So this is the first one. The second one, and the last one, is our member states must address copyright issues where indigenous communities have been, their indigenous knowledge has been stolen and commodified elsewhere. I think this is a member states issue. If a member state can be able to take cases to The Hague for different issues, I think this is time to also look at ways in which our globalized, our private sector that have stolen some of the knowledge from the indigenous communities can be taken to the highest court so that the justice can be done. I thank you.
Commissioner Salma, 1 minute.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Je pense, Monsieur le Président, qu'aujourd'hui, l'éducation pour tous, l'inclusion totale pour tous ne doivent pas rester comme de simples slogans, mais qu'ils doivent au contraire être concrétisés et matérialisés sur le terrain. En Afrique, les défis sont peut-être encore plus importants qu'ailleurs, mais on saisit l'occasion de cette année de l'Union africaine consacrée à l'éducation et également l'occasion de ce panel pour inviter tous les États africains à redoubler d'efforts afin d'assurer cette éducation inclusive, notamment pour les demandeurs d'asile et les réfugiés. Les États africains devraient peut-être élargir leurs systèmes d'éducation nationaux et améliorer la qualité de l'éducation et son caractère inclusif. Nous pensons également que les États pourraient procéder peut-être à la facilitation de la reconnaissance des équivalences des diplômes ou des titres académiques et professionnels des réfugiés et peut-être penser même à un système de dérogation pour, en cas d'absence, peut-être des diplômes originaux qui ne peuvent pas peut-être être récupérés dans les pays d'origine. Enfin, les États membres de l'Union africaine sont invités à adopter des lois qui garantissent, des lois avec des dispositions expresses qui garantissent l'accès à l'éducation à tous, y compris pour les enfants demandeurs d'asile et réfugiés. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président, et je vous rends la parole.
Lastly, but not the least, Dr. Olabode, are you still with us? You have a minute for your parting shot. Okay. Very well. Of this panel discussion, and I must just say that the main objective was to raise awareness on the right to education in Africa in general, while paying specific attention to marginalized groups, including girls, children in rural areas, those living with disabilities, indigenous populations, and refugees and asylum seekers. I would like to thank the panelists for the treatment that they gave to the topics that they had been assigned. And I'm sure you agree with me that they handled their topics very well. Thank you very much.
Honorable Commissioner Nenega, for bringing the theme of the year of the AU, Educating Africa Fit for the 21st Century, within the Commission and hosting this panel. I know I'm a panelist, but I must say that I think the panelists have given very good insights, and I've actually addressed the concept as conceived, being the sensitization and awareness on issues related to vulnerable persons, ranging from women, girls, persons with disabilities, indigenous persons, migrants. And I think they've been thoroughly handled. So I think this panel, generally I shouldn't be saying that, but I think this panel deserves a round of applause. I think I'm a panelist. Thank you, Honorable. That brings us to the end of the day. We're supposed to have another panel discussion celebrating the Rwanda guidelines, but unfortunately, due to time constraint, that will have to be postponed. I'm sure we'll inform in due course when that will happen at some point tomorrow. Our profound apologies to those panelists because they were already on standby. I'm informed. And we thank you for your graciousness for agreeing to defer to tomorrow. We'll be informed duly. I'll just hand over to Irene to just tell us about the tour because we've closed now for today. Irene, for tomorrow.
Thank you, Honorable Vice Chairperson. We're just going to close for lunch and we'll share the agenda for tomorrow during the course of the day. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think what the appeal I would like to make, Irene, to avoid the situation we found ourselves today where people will register and they're not available. Maybe that is being done, but if you can reach out to them, for those who are scheduled to speak tomorrow, especially we hope to have a country report tomorrow. Those are, well, that's not open for this deliberation anyway, but if there's anybody that is out there, can reach out to them somehow so that they know, because those who are dealing with the registration, to inform them about rescheduling, so that at least we have the opportunity of having interaction. Because I think these panelists, they're not meant for us. We're not supposed to be speaking to each other. We're supposed to be also speaking to the human rights family in the continent. Please, that's the special ask I have here.